I fell into Running the Landing, my Substack newsletter about SA in the airline industry, because of American Airlines Flight 587, which crashed into Queens in 2001 and killed over 260 people. I knew the American Airlines first officer at the controls of the second deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history. The horrific crash changed so many lives and caused generational trauma for the Dominican community, as 90% of 587's passengers were of Dominican descent. Many American Airlines employees also lost friends and family that day. Now, decades later, through a wild sequence of events, American Airlines insiders are revealing things about the pilot flying the Airbus that shines new light on what happened that tragic day and why. I'm talking to fellow passengers here. We're going to talk about why the crash of American Airlines Flight 587 matters now and why we're working so hard to help prevent future accidents due to the human factor of the person at the controls of your aircraft. As safe as air travel is, passengers are still at risk flying with major airlines from something most don't even know about. You hear, if it's Boeing, I'm not going. But we're talking about a much more widespread safety issue that transcends mechanics and design. What happens if the person at the controls of the plane you're on isn't who you think they are? A warning. This story is upsetting, shocking, and full of twists and turns you won't see coming. Nothing is as it seems. Trigger warnings for S, A, and R. Let's go. In the late 90s, a friend set me up with a guy who needed a date to a wedding. He was older, in his 30s, and told me he was the youngest pilot ever hired by American Airlines. He drove us from his hometown of Greenwich, Connecticut, to the storybook seaside town of Newport, Rhode Island. The wedding was held at Jackie Kennedy's childhood home of Hammersmith Farm. We drank champagne and ate freshly shucked oysters. We had fun at the wedding. He seemed like a really nice guy. We laughed and got along well, but there wasn't much of a physical attraction. Any romantic contact is as innocent as it gets, and that's as far as it went. I mention this only because it will become important later. A few weeks later, he called and invited me on a trip to Belize using his free American Airlines travel passes. I was tempted, but I didn't want to use precious vacation days for a trip with a guy I saw no future with, so I declined. I was a newlywed expat working in my office in London when 587 crashed. The tragic event came on the heels of 9/11, and American Airlines employees were still mourning those they lost weeks before. When I learned it was my old friend Sten Molin at the controls, it was a huge shock. I felt sick. To think this fun, vibrant guy had died so horrifically was unthinkable. At the same time, I knew it wasn't my loss. I hadn't spoken to him in a few years. I thought of the people who'd lost their lives and of those they left behind. I thought of Sten's close friends and family. Adding to the intensity for me was the fact that on our date years earlier, we'd talked about my fear of flying, and he'd talked me down after my own small plane crash. Thinking of his last moments was unbearable. I contacted our mutual friend, and then I moved on. 3 years later, Sten Molin was blamed for the crash of Flight 587. The NTSB determined the probable cause of the crash to be Molin's unnecessary and excessive rudder pedal inputs. In the face of wake turbulence, they called, quote, nothing extraordinary, unquote. There were contributing factors, including Airbus's rudder system design and American Airlines pilot training. The 20th anniversary of 9/11 and the crash of Flight 587 were coming up, and I wanted to write a tribute to my friend who had died so horribly. The fact that the NTSB blamed Molin for the crash due to his aggressive use of the rudder and ailerons was unsettling. If a pilot wasn't trained and capable, surely an airline wouldn't keep him employed, right? I was acutely aware that you don't know what you don't know. I hadn't known him much beyond a weekend date, so I knew there was a possibility of a recent love interest who might not appreciate me chiming in about a fun blind date, or perhaps a legal issue to do with the crash. So, like in a wedding when they say speak now or forever hold your peace, I tracked down people who knew him best from his hometown of Greenwich, Connecticut. I asked if there was any reason I shouldn't write these glowing articles. I did as much of my own research as I could. I saw how packed the church was for his memorial, that his local yacht club dedicated a sailboat in his name, and I'd met some of his very nice friends that weekend in Newport. I figured he was probably a good guy. Ultimately, I got the go-ahead from his Greenwich connections. I wrote 2 articles on Medium and posted them on social media, never expecting them to go beyond my close friends and family. And then all hell broke loose. My friends and family reacted to the stories on Facebook, but elsewhere I wasn't receiving much feedback. So I was perplexed weeks later when I started getting ugly, abusive messages on socials. I figured they were trolls, so I blocked and ignored. They came at me hard on a few platforms. The notes became oddly specific, and I finally engaged because clearly something was going on. I told them to contact me privately and that I would listen. And I did. Other tweets also came in that were more even-handed, almost pleading. So I DM'd with a few American Airlines current and former employees, including a flight attendant, and we connected over email. She gave my email address to some women who wanted to share their stories, and what they said blew me away. Sten Molin was no gentleman, they said. In fact, they said he had SA'd, harassed, or R'd multiple women and underage girls, many of them on layovers on trips that he was the first officer on. I could barely process all this incoming information. I was in shock, horrified, and in tears upon reading such personal messages that described graphic assault in the workplace. They were angry at him, at American Airlines, and some of them were angry at me. Some said they never touched alcohol again after Molin R'd them after plying them with booze. Another said she had to get drunk to even write her story to me. Several shared devastatingly that Molin's assaults on them ruined intimacy with good men to this day. Several said that over the years they'd written to prominent male aviation writers about Molin's behavior, but none ever responded or inquired further. I eventually removed the articles at the request of Molin's living victims, yet I was still discombobulated, and now so were some of the women writing to me, because no one could agree on who Sten Molin was. Everyone thought they knew him. He graduated from Annapolis, flew Secret Navy missions, and lost a good friend in a training accident, which is what we now call the Top Gun story. But no, he put himself through Yale Medical School, was a bartender after getting a scholarship at age 16. Wait, no, he was Air Force, stationed at North Dakota. No, he went to MIT to become an astronaut. And in between, he flew Concorde for Air France. Sten Molin's double life was a carefully constructed, meticulous plan that fooled everyone. But I knew his time was documented and accounted for. It really wasn't hard. He flew commuter planes before joining American and did not serve in the military. He went to the University of Rhode Island for 1 year and finished his degree online. I knew he owned a condo and a home with a basement at Crawford Terrace, but he didn't own one in upscale Bellhaven. Then there's the Miami life with an apartment and a short-lived consulting business. And then the third life that shocked his hometown crowd, Molin's affinity for Australia and his reported hangout at Bankstown. Somewhere out there, legend has it, this American Airlines first officer inverted a 747. You can imagine the arguments in the aviation community about that claim. The floodgates opened after I posted a short, factual piece titled A Brief Biography of Sten Molin. After that, more women flooded my inbox and social media with stories about Sten's assault and harassment. I was told he would befriend young women around New York airports and offer them rides home, eventually grooming and R-ing them. This was in addition to the flight attendants he raped while on layovers, sexually assaulted, stalked, banged on their doors, forced his way into their rooms. Then there were the heartbreaking reports from women who were 13 through 16 years old when they say he sexually assaulted or raped them in 2 of his Connecticut properties under the guise of tutoring them in computers or aviation. He would also send reams of overwrought and offensively graphic emails, some plagiarized from poets like Pablo Neruda, despite pleas for him to stop. The women who wrote to me said no one at the airline came to the flight attendant's aid, and Sten Molin was allowed to keep flying despite ample evidence of unhinged and illegal behavior. I've asked American if they ever received complaints about Molin, and they've never confirmed or denied. I started writing about the case without naming Sten Molin. Thus, The Landing was born. I haven't accused Molin of doing anything to me, but I'm the only one with my name out there, so I've become a target, which is sadly not unusual for women who expose wrongdoing within powerful institutions. This is why Molin's victims haven't revealed their identities publicly, but they've been sharing their stories everywhere for years. They have private Facebook groups I'm not invited to. They started the Reddit group Survivors of Sten Molin that I stay far away from now, and there's a Quora page of survivors set up for others to be heard. The women have talked to other award-winning journalists and documentary producers I have spoken to, corresponded with, and confirmed identities of victims and witnesses from American Airlines. I believe them. The women allege American Airlines knew about Molin's behavior but did nothing to stop him. One of the many reasons I believed them right away was because American could have put the kibosh on the Sten Molin scandal from day one. But for over 2 years, they have not once responded to my requests for comment and clarification. I believed the women because just because Sten Molin had respected my boundaries didn't mean he didn't violate other women. You can never look at a man and say, he'd never do that. Many predators are well-liked and popular, otherwise they'd never get in the position of power or trust in the first place. Their double lives are carefully constructed so the right people see their respectable side. The victims are often disbelieved and extremely vulnerable. There were a lot of reasons I believed these women. I recognized the language of SA survivors because I'm one myself. A very famous man SA'd me while I was on assignment as a reporter for People magazine, which I disclosed in this letter, though I did not identify my assailant. That said, I spent a full year investigating, speaking to victims, and taking advice from flight attendants and some new pilot friends before I named Sten Molin as a predator. That was October 2022. A major production company had found the landing and approached me about including the women in a documentary. Producers were shocked and moved by the women's online testimonials and felt their stories deserved a bigger platform. I know these women are telling the truth. Another reason? The Sten Molin story is not unusual in this industry. I started receiving messages from women from airlines around the globe, including from pilots or their attorneys. This wasn't about Sten Molin anymore. This is about an institution run by men where women are objects, interlopers, or playthings, where predators are protected and victims are shamed, retaliated against, or told to get over it. Airlines enable them with virtual impunity. Those who speak out pay a price, as I've personally discovered. But I'm not here to help cover up for these predators or their enablers, and neither are the brave women I write about. This was posted by an American Airlines captain publicly on his Facebook page. This was a voicemail left by a Delta captain for a flight attendant who had inquired about how she could seek a career as a pilot. And this one was from Southwest captain threatening a black flight attendant who he had hit on while she was working, and she had dared to say no to him. This is American Airlines again. It speaks for itself. How does this all relate to passenger safety? Let's examine a current case of another American Airlines first officer. Sigsbee John Nelson was the FO on a flight to Brazil in 2019 when, at 35,000 feet, allegedly strolled to the aft galley to ask some flight attendants for alcohol, court papers say. Luckily for every soul on board, the veteran flight attendants on duty refused. This seemed to anger Nelson, who sexually harassed both FAs, and then, after landing, he sexually assaulted one of them in front of the other in the crew's hotel elevator, court papers say. The very upset flight attendants told the flight's captain, the man in charge, about Nelson's behavior. American Airlines captain Bob Sipovac wasn't surprised, court papers say. Allegedly, he told the FAs that Nelson had boasted of his sexual conquests with underage prostitutes, in reality what were child slaves, and visits to strip clubs during layovers, even showing pictures he kept as mementos. Yet Sipovac did nothing to protect the FAs or report Nelson, the lawsuit says. American employees said Nelson once got so drunk while in uniform on the crew shuttle that he fell over and split his pants. Nelson was eventually allowed to retire with full benefits and no disciplinary marks on his record, allowing him to go fly for another airline. So, from a passenger's perspective, we've got a veteran first officer never disciplined for alcohol use or attempted alcohol use on duty, one who's allegedly reactive and quick to assault women who displease him, and a captain who kept him on as an FO for the trip back to LA. If I were scheduled to be on that flight and knew anything about what had gone on, I wouldn't have stepped foot on that aircraft, would you? You can read all about this case on The Landing, but again, it's not about one man. We have the institution, the apparatus around these men supporting behaviors that are not only detrimental to the women they target, but clearly put passengers in danger. Nelson had flown for American for decades. Court papers say American knew of earlier bad behavior, but the airline says they didn't. In fact, they said that since it happened in Brazil, a California court can't hold American responsible for its own pilot. Further, the airline argued the FAs didn't report the alleged assault and harassment in the right way. Telling the captain wasn't enough. American got out of the lawsuit with these arguments, so only Nelson goes on trial in August. The FA's attorneys plan to appeal to get American back in. What should scare us all is the airlines don't seem interested in making sure their pilots are in a fit condition to fly, which will bring us back to their other former first officer, Sten Molin. But first, one more egregious case of an airline protecting an alleged predator. The case of current Southwest captain, they re-hired him. He still flies for them. He could be the captain of the flight you're on right now. That means his victim was forced to work with her alleged rapist on a flight. He was in the captain's seat while she was keeping everyone safe. Or Southwest responded to my request for comment. This is an institutional problem that needs disrupting. Commercial airlines have normalized victims and survivors working under the authority of male pilots who have multiple credible reports against them. Too many of these cases are buried because victims are disincentivized to report their assaults. Retaliation is par for the course in the old boys club running the airlines. As the lawsuit by flight attendants in the Sigsbee Nelson case explains, they find themselves disgraced among their peers and isolated from the company just for speaking out about what a pilot did to them. At Southwest, Captain Christine Janning filed a lawsuit saying she was retaliated against for reporting her own alleged assault by her then captain in mid-air. Captain Michael Hack was convicted in federal court of stripping down and watching the P word on his tablet. The Landing broke the story that actually a new lawsuit said he did more than strip. He also, shall we say, took care of himself and then allegedly threw a soiled napkin that hit his first officer, Christine Janning. Jennings' lawsuit also says she feared for all on board as the 6'5" Hack was behaving so erratically. If I'd been on that flight in August of 2020, I'd have gotten myself a lawyer's stat. Her suit also says Hack had multiple reports of harassment and assault on flight attendants before he allegedly assaulted her, but Southwest did nothing about that. Before we get to the hidden safety issues, we need to understand the culture at American Airlines that court papers and witnesses say gives pilots free rein to prey on vulnerable employees they view as beneath them. The women who reported Molin's harassment and assaults warned me. They said they were subject to bullying, harassment, threats, and blackballing by superiors at American Airlines if they so much as hinted Molin was committing crimes against flight attendants. I'm told many of them have now signed non-disclosure agreements and settled with the airline, so we won't hear from them again. This suffocating and widely used tactic keeps toxic workplace cultures under wraps, so survivors are silenced and predators are protected. But as this growing movement shows, they can't silence everyone. Their testimony lives on, which you'll see at the end of this video. Another reason I believe the many women reporting their traumatic experiences with Molin was the type of people who came out to defend him. Men claiming to be American Airlines pilots obsessively sent bizarre rants that had little connection to reality. If these were Molin's friends, their seedy, aggressive, and threatening attacks made the accusations against Molin all the more believable. They've done everything they can to bully and intimidate me all across the internet. Difference is, I'm not a young flight attendant with my career in their hands and they can't bully me. People send me screenshots of male American Airlines pilots arguing online with anonymous accounts they accuse of being me, so I get abuse on my platforms and anywhere people are talking about Molin's assaults. Interestingly, I've told them to stop for months. Their response? You asked for it. To any SA survivor, this victim blaming is all too familiar. These American Airlines guys seem to have trouble with the concept of consent. Here comes your second big twist. I was getting so many questions and abusive messages this spring that I created an FAQ about the origin of the landing, which included some passages from the original stories I'd written in 2021, the ones my former colleagues from decades of journalism read, plus my mom, my husband, my friends, and professional contacts on LinkedIn. Molin's victims had asked me to remove the articles years before, so I wanted to warn them before posting the excerpts, and that's when I got the shock of my life. One of his victims told me the only reason she and others had steamed in to set me straight was because they'd been given screenshots of graphic scenes from a hotel room ostensibly written by me. Obviously, an author in the midst of promoting a book about the history of women in the military was not going to be writing bad P-word about herself and then publishing it. Apparently, it was some pretty graphic and nauseating stuff. And the wild thing is the flight attendants tell me that if they'd known my experience with Molin was so tame, they probably would have never come after me and the story would have remained buried possibly forever. So whoever created these fake screenshots, whether someone who was mad at me for writing about a fancy wedding or a bad prankster, they're the reason this came out. I never would have pivoted and corrected the record if they hadn't come after me. To this day, no one will tell me if it was a prank or a targeted attack or who might have done it. Thankfully, the internet is forever, and my actual stories, which contain nothing more graphic than a quick smooch on the lawn at a wedding, have a big digital footprint. I'm told the fake articles with my name on them are up on the wall in the London crew rest area at Heathrow. Whoever takes them down, I'll buy you a pint next time I'm in town. Speaking of my book about my time volunteering in the US Army, I realize now that on our date, Molin tailored his game to what he thought I wanted to hear. We talked about the fact I'd just done an article and photo shoot for Shape magazine about women's strength, and all of a sudden he was an ardent feminist playing Peter Gabriel shaking the tree in his car and crowing about how it was about female empowerment. The abuse continues. This is what it's like for women who speak out. I only check this email address every once in a while now, but just to see what it's like. There's one I have not opened yet, and we're gonna click on that and see what they have to say. I'm a senior captain, sure, okay. I'm disgusted by your behavior. Most of the crew at American are disgusted by your behavior. Most of the crew are thinking about me. Who knew? That's a lot of people. Imagine what poor Sten had to suffer. Well, he did invite me to Belize, but whatever. Don't need to hear you validate your foul and obscene language on Reddit. I don't go to Reddit anymore. Long time ago I did. Not anymore. Found your behavior, which is completely wrong, even from a woman. Ooh, what does that mean? Just the opposite of personality disorder. You are cloying so hard. Oh, dear Lord. Yes, he had another girl. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. A reminder, I put my name on all my content, including comments. If it doesn't have my name on it, it's not for me. I do not engage with these unhinged anonymous accounts. You'd think American Airlines would at least respond to me about these self-identified pilots of theirs stalking and harassing me, just like Molin did years ago to flight attendants. They obsessively harass me, demanding I give them information about sexual assault victims. This is highly alarming and inappropriate. I'm told they're out trying to find the survivors. One of them said, and I quote, "I would like you to provide me with a detailed timeline of these alleged assaults." Another one wrote, "Someone seems intent on destroying his memory. We'll find out who that is." At the end of the day, this attempt by anonymous cowards is laughable. American is not sending out their best people. I've written the airline a detailed letter outlining the abuse by their pilots, and the response is crickets. But as we've seen, they don't seem to care if they have people like this at the controls. But someone should tell them that passengers care very much. Now you have a flavor of the cesspool the FAs had to work in with these so-called officers in the flight deck. Is your pilot drunk, obsessing about flight attendants, jerking off on the flight deck, thinking about drugging and raping an FA, angrily resenting his female co-pilot? These are real examples from airlines we're flying with right now. There are mostly good men out there, and some legendary international commercial pilots correspond with me now, both men and women. They provide valuable insight and perspective, but there are too many bad apples and not enough good ones shutting them down. Some pilots and flight attendants say a culture of unchecked sexual misconduct in the airline industry remains a safety threat today. Passengers are already on edge with doors blown out mid-flight, engines on fire, and the preventable tragedies on Boeing 737 MAX, which sparked the catchphrase, "If it's Boeing, I'm not going." Add to that, if it's Southwest, I'm stressed. The story of American Airlines Flight 587 matters now, and this story needs to be told. Flight attendants can be an early warning sign that a pilot isn't well, but they're punished for speaking up, and that puts passengers in peril. The behavior FAs reported about Molin and the pressure of maintaining a double life indicated a potential for distraction that raises questions about his fitness to fly, aviation experts say. The CVR transcript shows Molin persistently violated the sterile flight deck rule, a regulation prohibiting crew from engaging in non-essential activities and chatter at certain times. There were 4 mentions of yawning, plus singing, humming, and jumping from topic to topic in the NTSB report. The NTSB found pseudoephedrine and ephedrine, 2 stimulants the FDA says can cause psychosis, severe depression, mania, agitation, hallucinations, and suicidal ideation in his remains. The LA Times reported Molin took medicine for a cat allergy, but there was no indication he owned one, and there aren't many cats in the flight deck. Let's do what's necessary to make air travel safer. Let's support victims and whistleblowers instead of retaliating against them. The dinosaurs continuing to harass me and Molin's victims need to be put out to pasture. Time's up. Over 2 years, I counted about 70 different reports from women harassed or assaulted by American Airlines pilot Sten Molin, which I whittled down after comparing similar anonymous accounts across various platforms. I got that down to a possible 50, but a probable dozen or two individual victims that we know of. American Airlines has never denied paying off his victims after several requests for comment. I had no idea who this man really was. The line between his Greenwich life and his American Airlines life was so carefully built up that neither side could see past it, and that was the point. With all their rage, these American Airlines pilots have not once expressed a modicum of concern or empathy for the pain and trauma Molin's victims have endured. They care more about a dead man's reputation than the women who are living with what he did to them. While I often wish I'd never heard that man's name, I am inspired that these women helped start a movement. We're part of a growing underground network ready to support women and other victims who want to come forward and stand up. It's an under-the-radar network of pilots, flight attendants, journalists, victims, and survivors. We collaborate and connect and make introductions, and somehow they find us on LinkedIn, on email, on social media platforms, and everyone's always willing to help. But we need people who say, I'm going to stand up and be brave, and I'm not going to take this anymore, and I'm not going to stand here and see this happen on my watch. The women who are coming forward in their numbers are putting the airlines on notice. Airlines like Delta, American, United, Southwest, JetBlue, Ryanair, all of you. We're not going to take it anymore, and you're not going to be able to hide it anymore. If you are being abused at work and you want to speak up, I'm here to tell you, you can do this. You can survive and you can thrive. Be the change you want to see.